Hi, everybody. In today's episode of Techbahas, we have a special guest with us, Satkar, who is currently studying his master's in business analytics from the University of South Dakota. In today's session, we will be diving into his recent project and we'll be explaining how small business changes could help in various sectors. Handing over to Satkar.
Hi everyone. Let's get started. मैले चाहिँ एउटा सानो presentation slash slide बनाएको छु. Talk about a project that I recently did that involved data science and analytics, mainly data warehousing and stuff. Basic overview of me, myself, and what I've been doing right now. I'm a full-time MS student pursuing my business analytics at the University of South Dakota. These are the three keywords that my AI defined me as: analytics, growth, and strategy. These are my core focus. So before we dive into the project that I did, problem that I solved, let's talk about what led me to this journey because I come from a very non-traditional path, combining my passion for tech, of course. So basically, right after SLC, like the high school, I was sent to college to pursue my high school in science. Basically, I did my plus two in science, and my whole expectation from the program was that I would learn computer science. But to my surprise, we did not have a single computer science class. All I was doing was physics, chemistry, biology, stuff like that that I wasn't even interested in. And I had a horrible time during my plus two. I failed miserably. So the only time I passed my exam was during 12 board. So I was already doing my backlog exam for class 11 and stuff like that. So while my friends were applying for all those CS programs in the United States and stuff like that, I had to force my hand, stay back in Nepal, and that's when I realized I wanted to do business, right? And then we had like home studio set up, and me and my friend we decided to go to a business school thinking that we need to do business. We thought there was a lot of money in music, so we started we used to do like small events, we used to make small bit of money, so hustle garera and stuff like that. So I got into the path of entrepreneurship when I got into King's College because King's College is one of those colleges in Nepal that is more focused on making people, empowering people to start their own business rather than teaching business. And that is where I got connected with other people who also wanted to start their own business. Then we formed a team, so it was more like a startup journey where we started, managing artists. So our whole goal was to, rather than having people pay up for studio time, we would rather manage artists, give them the show, and manage the profit, between the management and the artists, so all of us could profit. But that idea wasn't really selling. Only whenever you're doing a startup, there are two things: one is pivot and one is iteration. Iteration is more like if you are building an app and if you just add one more feature to it, it's more like iteration. But pivot is when you decide to do something but you start doing something differently. So rather than working on our artist management side, we started working on developing the first music streaming app specially dedicated for Nepal. So back then I had like zero tech experience, but I was already working with people who were like data engineers, analysts, and software development. That's when I realized that how, Netflix, Spotify, everything uses recommender engine, and everything that defines customer experience rather boils down to algorithm. That's where I got really curious about data analytics and how it could do, right? So my businesses were failing and I was also graduating. So when I was graduating, it was like peak lockdown. So at lockdown, I was just doing some content writing, freelancing stuff. I had like bunch of free time to kill. So what I did during lockdown was I converted my passion into a discipline. I would say I would read a lot, bunch of HBR white papers about how Netflix uses data, how Gmail uses data. For example, I went to a conference or a talk session back in Nepal when I got introduced to the concept of big data and how actually Google beat Yahoo in the market by giving us with free space, and in return they were using all the data and analytics to profit from. So that's when I thought, like, the world is very far ahead, I am lagging behind. And I tried few courses back in Nepal, and I would be honest, they did not really help. And that's when I become committed towards pursuing my MS journey in the United States, because when I was applying for like bunch of universities, I already knew that I was gonna bridge the skill gaps that I desperately require, like learning Python, learning ML theories, learning like a lot of Power BI application and stuff like that. So that's a little bit of intro about me and my journey now. So basically, it was a part of our data warehousing and data management class where we were supposed to deliver a functional database using MySQL Server. So the whole goal was to create like the entity relationship diagram, convert that into schema, convert that into like working database that could serve a business function. So rather than doing like cliche already like guided project, I decided to do something different. I picked up a case study from a marketing journal. Only that basically that case study covered like all of those problems that the business was facing, because it was a traditional business that had failed to digitize on time, and they were very much reliant on legacy technologies. Their database system was not proper. They had like multiple databases, so everything was not organized, or let's say centralized. So the flow of information within the organization was not distributed well. So that's what analysts do. So the first thing of analyst is to collect business requirements, understand what the business problems are being faced in the organization, and try to understand that problem and create a solution, and try to make sure that the solution is data driven, right? So after going through the case study and trying to understand what the core problem was, me and my team, we kind of figured out that the reservation, so if guest were to make a reservation, that information was not being communicated to the manager. So the guest would arrive and the manager would not even know the name of the guest. So that is very bad for a business, especially in a hospitality business, especially if you're paying like thousands of dollars, or like let's say thousands of rupees to stay in a place. You go there and you're not greeted by your name, and the staff do not know which room you're booked in and stuff like that. So that's already gonna affect your core business. So by reviewing the case study over and over, brainstorming, we realized that the reservation system was the center of the operations. The feedback were not being collected. The reservation data was being collected by a different system, and the feedback was being collected by a different system, and the transaction was being collected by a different system, right? So everything was into pieces and pieces. So we wanted something that was centralized, and because everything has relations, so we just wanted to create a relational database for that purpose. So we would know which guest is staying in which room, what they have ordered, what are their bills looking like. Not only that, but the power of analytics pushes you further. For example, if you are a regular visiting guest and if you are used to ordering a certain drink when you arrive, imagine if the program coordinator or the staff in the hotel already knew about that information, and the drink is already made ready for you, right? That is the power of analytics, because once we start collecting data and once we start running like trend analysis or stuff like that, we can already predict what a regular customer is going to do. And on the same time, we can know who our regular customers are and who are like just like one-time customers are based on their transaction and stuff like that. So to give more analytical edge to the database that we created, we extracted more information and we created a Snowflake data warehouse. So basically, Snowflake is a architect data warehousing architecture that is used by a lot of businesses, and that was mainly focused on performing feedback analysis, trend reporting, and referral tracking, because we wanted to know where our because by building the that layer we could know like where the majority of the customers were coming from. Are they coming from our website, or are they coming from a travel agency, or are they coming just because of word of mouth from like other customers? At the same time, we could do real time trend reporting to figure out like which dates we're getting like a lot of bookings, so we could have like more staffs assigned for that days. And we could also figure out slower days where there would not be much customers, and we could cut down on our staff resources, so we could save some money, right? And at the same time, that would also integrate the feedbacks and the ratings being provided not only to each stay but to each of the experiences or each of the services that they are taking. So by increasing the granularity of the details, basically what we're trying to do is understand what the business does. किनभने लास्टमा गएर data is just the blueprint of what an organization does, right? So the key factor of doing this project was trying to understand what a hotel does and what an end user would do with the application that we are creating. So at the end of the day, the impact that the business can benefit from a centralized database, which can be further extended for like analytical use, is they could know like which customers to spend more money on. Because there's a huge rule in business is called the Pareto principle that says that 80% of your revenue actually comes from 20% of that customers, right? So for a business, having a centralized database, a data warehouse, and an analytical system that keeps track of all the customer and transaction system allows you to know that 20% of the market. And that would allow executives working in the firm to actually create marketing campaigns or sales campaign to retain those 20%, so that can keep money rolling to the hotel. At the same time, another huge benefit was they could optimize their staffing schedule rather than basing your work on guessworks. You could already know, you could do trend analysis, you could do time series forecasting and stuff like that to find seasons or shifts where you could like potentially increase the number of staffs or decrease the number of staffs, so you would not compromise on customer service. At the same time, you would also save a lot of cost for the business. At the end of the day, the whole goal of the project was for each of the staff to have a dashboard that gives them a complete information about the guest. Maybe a certain guest has a peanut allergy. They would know beforehand about such important information about the guest would be directly communicated in real time to the service provider at hotel, either they be program coordinator or just like some staff that they are serving. So basically, even an end user who just knows how to use a simple gadget like mobile or tablet, they would be empowered in your organization to know about customer before they come. So at the end of the day, the whole goal is to enhance customer service. So that was what that was what we could accomplish, and that was what we documented and presented as part of our college project, right? So those were the tech stack that I used MS SQL Server for database design and everything. I heavily relied on Cursor IDE to do a lot of coding and also brainstorming. And then I used ERD Plus for diagramming. I mean, creating the relational schema and the ERD. So the logical database modeling was pretty much done on ERD Plus. And if you are someone who's like really, really into database, I think ERD Plus is a really great free tool that allows you to do all the logical thing, like ERD to relational schema, and also fiddle with a lot of data warehousing structure as well. Compared to other paid platforms, I find ERD Plus to be really effective. And at the same time, I heavily um, one of the huge advantage or one of the greatest learning curve from this project was how important is documentation. Because from day one we were taking a milestone approach. We set goals for like, rather than tackling this project at once, we broke the project into three small deliverables. And at the same time, we were documenting all of the iterations that we made, of course, using generative AI and also compiling them at the same time. And this is when I learned that documentation is not just for us to communicate to other users, but documentation is important for us as developers, as analysts, or as engineers, because when we are working with multiple things, we tend to forget. And if we document whatever we have done, and if we pick up that maybe a couple of days later or like a week later, we would not forget about that. It would serve as a beautiful reminder. It will remind you of your creative flow, your workflow, and you can just jump back into it. Because before I started this project, I used to start a lot of projects, and I used to give up at the middle of it because I would forget why I started the project in the first place. So documentation was the most important and the most effective teaching part of it. So yeah, this is the project, and every time I end a project, I always like mention the assumptions, because the data were not real. It was generated with AI, and you need to let people know. I think being honest is one of the qualities that every working professional should have, and writing the limitations of your study and like the future, in future what you can do, or something like future direction would also be. This is one of the database data warehousing project that I did. And besides that, I really like working with ML as well, and I really like working on the data science part of thing more than building database or stuff like that. I am someone who's more intrigued on answering the why and finding out why. So recently, right after my semester was done, I learned a lot about linear regression and the extension of linear regression, such as lasso regression, trace regression. So these are all the mathematical models that is basically the basis of a lot of AI tools that we see. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you are also pretty much aware. So our course, so one of the courses that I did was heavily focused on ML, and we came to learn about a lot of ML tools, but we just learned it in theory. We never implemented it. So right after the semester was done, I really wanted to do something with that. And I am an R user. I use like a lot of R programming, and I have been like very, you know, passive about not using Python, but Python is everywhere. So I just challenged myself to do some ML on Python, and I would also like to present about it. It was basically on DoorDash. So whenever I usually look for project, I usually search for take home projects for whatever role that I'm applying. So this was a take home project by DoorDash for one of his data scientist position. So the whole goal was, DoorDash is a food delivery app, for those you know, and for those who do not know, it's like one of the best food delivery apps, I would say, because I am a heavy DoorDash user, and I really love that product because it delivers on its promise, right? So a business, and the promise that a business makes is really important for it to win customer. For example, if you order something online and if it says it's coming tomorrow, but if it does not come for the next week, you'll obviously lose trust on that business, right? So similarly, for DoorDash to win, to be in a position where it is, it had to be sure about winning the trust of his customers. So whenever you order something, it shows like estimated time of delivery or something like that. So that is just prediction at work. So companies are actually winning on prediction algorithms that helps predict what the customers might like. And so basically the data set was very rich. It had like more than 170,000 DoorDash logs of delivery logs and stuff like that. So I started going through the data first, and I started picking on some variables and stuff like that, trying to understand the relationship, did some EDA. So this is what the sample data look like if you can have a closer look. So this is what I worked with. So the data itself was not that clean as you would find in a lot of like certification or like college courses, because I had this was the time I had to do like a lot of feature engineering, because to begin the workflow itself, I did not have the predictor variable. I had to create the predictor variable myself by doing some data cleaning and manipulation, converting time into seconds. Basically, this was the data that I was dealt with. And then like I had like a bunch of numeric data, but I had categorical data. So categorical data is any data that is not numeric, right? And in any kind of regression problem or ML problem, we usually convert our categorical variables into dummy variables, or in Python term, we do one hot encoding or something like that, right? So I took a structured approach to creating the new features. So rather than relying on the features that I had, I started wondering, like, other features that I could play with. So I could create new features like average price per time, item diversity ratio, price range of times, and stuff like that. And at the same time, I was encoding and converting my categorical variables into dummy variables so the machine could understand the difference between the categories. So after I cleaned the data and after I made sure that all the features were ready to make my prediction, which is something I spent like majority of this project time on, I was able to find some interesting features. So the main factor that affected delivery time was, of course, the estimated driving time from a location to another location. And another thing was the average price per item. So that makes sense, the monetary value of the order. And one of the interesting finding was that one of the features that I actually created from the original predictors was also one of the top features, which was the busy ratio, because your food tends to be late when there are a lot of orders going on. For example, if it's a festive season, or let's say if it's the World Cup final, chances are people are gonna order a lot of bunch of stuff, right? There's gonna be a lot of orders. So sometimes your intuition also wins, and that is one of the proof. And at the same time, I was comparing a lot of models like linear, viz, decision tree, random, XGBoost, and stuff like that. I really did not go into neural networks or deep learning networks because I don't really feel like the need to do that, because it's at the end of the day, if you use advanced models like that, it's gonna be, you're gonna have a tough time, explaining that stuff to, especially to non-technical stakeholders. So I just wanted to keep it simple and just used classic machine learning techniques. But at the same time, I used a lot of statistical approach to make sure that the workflow, that the procedure that I was following was correct, and I just did not took any shortcuts. So I did a lot of diagnosis, such as like mapping out the correlation and eliminating any unnecessary variables in the beginning by running VIF, or just finding out, like, just removing like highly correlated features and features that were correlated with each other. And at the end of the day, my evaluation metric was obviously RMSE. RMSE tells you like how your predicted values are off from the actual values. And from this project, I was able to understand a lot of things. First of all, to create a proper ML workflow, and then do some prediction on Python. And at the same time, from a business perspective, I could find out that if the estimated time that's being shown on the any delivery app or like Google Map, that's the main feature that affects like how long it's going to take you to deliver food. Another thing is feature engineering is much more important. The features, the variables that you work with whenever you're working in prediction model, that's something much more important than the models that you're working with. And yeah, so that was my finding from this project. And a little bit of advice on, if you want to approach any data science or any computer science project, is that you need to learn how to make difference between sewing project and learning project, because a lot of the times we go through bunch of like learning projects, self-guided projects, and we put them on our portfolio, but that does not make us different, because I think there are hundred thousands of people who use data set like Titanic, Iris, or Boston Housing, because these are data set that has been used to taught like thousands of curriculums. So that does not make you stand out. So I would rather suggest you to work with messy data, something that you're like passionate about. Like it could be sports, it could be like a certain field of business or a certain field of like it might be like predicting your own schedule or something like that. So try to make sure that your projects at least solve some real world problems or some business problems. I am someone who did not know how to code, who did not know like a lot of tech stuff, like maybe 16 months ago. And I don't watch any videos. I don't follow any YouTube gurus. I just read a lot of books and I go through them. When I say I read a book, whenever I read a book, I document about what I learn. And I think a lot of people, especially in the field of DSA, data science and analytics, they think like 3 months crash courses and stuff like that makes them analyst or data scientist, but it's not that. I think the most important fact is that you need to master the foundation, and the foundations are stats, and then a bit of programming, and then having understanding about data structure. That is something that you simply cannot skip. And also, I started learning with a lot of certificates and online courses. They did not really work out for me because I feel like certificate courses, online courses are designed in such a way that caters to our ever shortening attention span. And if you want to get into like highly intensive field like data science or analytics, I don't think like shortcuts are cool because I think you need to spend like a lot of time trying to like master the fundamental concepts, learning the whys, and applying whatever you learn on those online courses on some real world data or real world problems. And I am also a victim of, we all have this tendency of comparing ourselves to other people, but just remember you are the benchmark because I usually do that. I compare myself and my skills. I look back like 6 months ago, I had like very amateur programming skills, but right now I can pretty much write off functions, call that function, deploy my model online. And it's just because if you are in this field, like coding or like solving problems is like it should be your regular habit, just like athletes train, like every single day, just like make sure you write a line of code every day. That is something I live by, and that is something I've been doing for the past year. And also something I had already touched upon previously is that please document whatever you do, whatever you learn. Just write it down. Just use Notebook LM. I mean, like I'm pretty sure that you guys know all about these tools. Make use of it and document your learning journey. I mean, I also like write a lot of blogs. Everything that I learn, I try to write it down somewhere, and I just let AI, make it better, structure wise, grammar wise, readability and whatnot. And I just post it somewhere because your name is always gonna be there, and maybe that might give you all the exposure that you need. And another thing that I think I do a lot to make my generative AI skills effective is that I am not loyal to one AI model, and I think you should not be because AI is not your girlfriend or your boyfriend. So use a lot of AI tools. If you think ChatGPT is not giving you a better response, just say like, "Hey, Claude is giving me a better response." And if Claude is doing that same thing, just say, "Hey, Gemini is giving me a better response." I have found that if you make AI jealous of each other, they actually perform better. So that is my last advice slash suggestion slash learning. And these are some links that you could follow. I'm on LinkedIn. I post a lot on LinkedIn. I would recommend everyone to post a lot on LinkedIn rather than on Instagram because if you don't want to be a social media content creator, there's not much ROI, return on investment, posting on Instagram or Facebook. I see more benefits by posting on sites like LinkedIn, compile your projects on GitHub, write more on Medium, tech stack, stuff like that.
So my question is, how to get into these kind of projects? How to find these kind of projects?
I would suggest read like a lot of journals because I am someone who's like really into entrepreneurship and marketing. So I read like Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal. Um, Also try to find, like I said, like whatever position that you're applying for. For example, if you are applying for software engineer and if you have like a dream company, let's say you really, really want to work for Spotify as a software engineer, what you can do is you can search like Spotify software engineer take home projects. I've been doing that recently and I come across like projects that they give people during the recruitment process. And I think that's a industry standard. And yeah, I think that would be a good way to find some case studies directly from the company or from some kind of publications.
So, what one advice would you give to someone who is starting in the field of business analytics or into data analyst? So, can you share a little bit about it?
I think there's like some basic stuff that you should get started with. So if you are someone who's just getting started, I would say get started with probability and basic statistics and the concepts of central tendency like mean, median, standard deviation, and a little bit of charts like histogram and stuff like that. And if you really want to go a lot deeper, I think the four core concepts of math that anyone in the DSA should master is number one, linear algebra, then obviously probability, and then of course matrices, and then I would also and yeah, of course, a little bit of calculus.
Is there any book recommendations?
I got started with a fairly easy book when I first started with Python. So for a lot of machine learning concepts and the statistical part of analysis, I really enjoyed the Intro to Statistical Learning book. It's just called ISLR. So there's a book called Introduction to Statistical Learning. I think a lot of people that they consider this like the holy bible of analytics and statistics. So it's available online, but it's a more complex read, I would say. So for someone really getting started, I would recommend the Pandas book by O'Reilly, but I just do not remember the exact name of the book. Also, another great advice would be like learn all the basic ML theory just using NumPy.
Can you share a little bit about a perspective towards AI?
I think it's just software engineering and stuff like that. I have a very different perspective towards that. I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you could go to school, and you could learn like one specific tool, one specific software, and you could be an expert in that field. Not just like computer engineering or software engineering. For example, let's say I'm an architect, and if I just know how to use CAD, like let's say like or any kind of design software, I would be an expert in that field, and I would have like a stable career, a promised career. But right now, even like in any profession, you need to know like 10,000 different tools, 10,000 different techniques, and stuff like that. And at the same time, AI replacing like software engineers, stuff like that. I think it was already foreseen. And I think it's the era of critical thinkers more than functional experts, I would say. So the more better you get with working with AI, I think more secure your future is. I think basically AI right now is just replacing mundane automated processes at any workplace. But if you have a really good relationship with AI, if you are someone who really understands like how AI works or like how Gen AI works, I think there are gonna be a lot of new job opportunities, a lot of new career opportunities that's gonna open up. For example, we were just talking about it with one of my professors last week. For example, AI product managers, like people who knows like what AI tools, what AI models would fit, you know, a certain business. Someone who could act a bridge between the end users and the business, and at the same time, like feels like analytics engineering, data engineering. These are kind of stuff that even if AI it becomes like way too advanced, I think it's like part science and part art about how we do. So I think those fields are secure, but the thing that can be easily that can be easily repeated, and that's like is very very mundane. I think it's gonna replace, and I think it's very 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 important that you learn how to interact with AI and become a good prompt engineer. And whenever talk about prompt engineering, a lot of time people think like just being a good writer makes you a good prompter or something like that, but I don't think that is the case. I think to become good with vibe coding, I think first of all you need to be a good debugger. You need to go back to what your Gen AI is responding. You need to like be very attentive and not just like copy paste like whatever is spitting out, but rather ask more why, because that is the way that you are fine tuning your model. So I think I would say like ask a lot of why when you're doing vibe coding. You'll learn a lot. And don't be worried that AI is going to take your job. I think if you are smart enough, you know, you will say like AI is going to create a lot of jobs and opportunities for us.
Move. Yes, thank you so much, Satkar, for this insightful session, sharing a little bit about your project, your experience, your ideas, and advice for people who's starting in building big tenant projects. And yeah, I would like to thank you for coming in this episode in Nepti and Tech.
Thank you so much for the platform for speaking with you about मैले like resources. If I find like एकदम important, I will be consistently posting to data world भन्ने सेक्सनमा, so watch out for me. And yeah, thank you everyone for being a wonderful audience and listening to me. If you have any question,